Eager to escape the humidity of Florida, Mark and Rachel had longed for an autumn road trip to New England. The allure of Maine's vibrant fall foliage was irresistible, especially after weeks of researching the best scenic routes through the northeastern mountains. They packed up their SUV early one October morning, the car filled with blankets, snacks, and excitement. The journey up Interstate 95 was seamless, with the gradual shift in landscape heightening their anticipation. By the time they reached the New England region, fiery reds, oranges, and golds painted the trees, casting a magical glow around the winding roads. One crisp afternoon, as they drove through Massachusetts, discussing the picturesque scenes they'd just captured, Mark noticed the speedometer creeping past the speed limit. He immediately slowed, but it was too late. In the rearview mirror, flashing blue lights appeared, and the unmistakable wail of a siren filled the air. "Damn it," Mark muttered, pulling over. A state trooper approached their car, his boots crunching on the gravel. Something about him unsettled Rachel. His face was shadowed beneath his hat, and even in the daylight, he seemed to carry an unnatural chill. When he spoke, his voice was gravelly, hollow, as if it had crawled up from some place deep underground. "License and registration," he drawled, his words slow and deliberate. Mark handed over his documents, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sorry, officer. Didn't realize I was speeding." The cop took the papers without a word, but the way his eyes lingered on them sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. They were cold, dead eyes, like he was seeing them, but also looking right through them. His face had a strange pallor to it, as though he hadn't seen sunlight in years. After a long pause, he scribbled something on a ticket, handing it back through the window. "Take care. These roads, they can be dangerous," he said in that raspy voice, turning back to his cruiser without another glance. The couple watched as he got into the patrol car. When Mark glanced back in the mirror to merge onto the road, he saw the car vanish, no lights, no movement, just gone, as if it had never been there. Rachel clutched the ticket in her hand. "That was weird," she whispered, her heart still pounding from the unsettling encounter. Mark shrugged it off, chalking it up to a strange cop with a strange attitude. "Let's not let it ruin our trip." They spent the rest of their vacation in Maine, awed by the beauty of the mountains draped in vivid hues of fall. They hiked, took photos, and reveled in the crisp, cool air. Every now and then, Rachel would remember the eerie officer and feel a twinge of unease, but she pushed it aside, determined not to let it spoil their getaway. On the drive home, as they passed through Massachusetts again, she half expected to see the same cop lurking by the side of the road, but nothing happened. It was a quiet, peaceful journey back to Florida. A week later, with the trip behind them, Mark decided to settle the speeding citation. He headed to the local courthouse, ticket in hand, while Rachel waited in the car. She watched him go inside, checking her phone and scrolling through the photos of their trip. But as the minutes passed, she felt a creeping sense of dread. It was taking longer than it should. After what seemed like forever, Mark finally returned, his face pale and his eyes wide with disbelief. "What's wrong?" Rachel asked, immediately feeling the tension. Mark slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "They said the cop who wrote the ticket, he's dead. He's been dead for over a year." Rachel stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I handed them the ticket," Mark explained, his voice shaking. "They checked the officer's badge number, and they said, he died in a car accident last year. Hit a tree while chasing someone down the highway. They even showed me his picture." He paused, swallowing hard. "It was him, Rachel. The same cop that pulled us over." Her blood ran cold. "That can't be right. We saw him." "I know," Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. "But they said he's gone." A heavy silence filled the car, the air thick with fear. Neither of them knew what to say. How could they have been pulled over by a man who was no longer alive? The memory of his cold stare, his raspy voice, now felt more sinister than ever. Days passed, and though they tried to forget about the encounter, the weight of it pressed down on them. Mark even went back to the courthouse, but they confirmed the same story. Officer Daniels had died in the line of duty, and there was no explanation for the ticket they had. That's when the dream started. Night after night, Rachel would wake in a cold sweat, hearing the cop's voice whispering, "These roads, they can be dangerous." Mark began seeing things on the road, flashes of blue lights in his rearview mirror, only to look back and see nothing. A dark figure standing by the side of the road, watching him as he drove past. Sometimes, he swore he heard a siren wail in the distance, growing closer, but when he turned to look, there was nothing. One evening, about a month after their trip, Mark and Rachel were driving home late. The highway was empty, the night unusually still. Mark kept glancing in the rearview mirror, a sense of impending doom gnawing at him. Suddenly, out of nowhere, those familiar blue lights flashed behind them, and a siren blared. "No," Rachel whispered, her heart racing. "Not again." Mark pulled over, his hands shaking uncontrollably. They sat in silence, waiting, the eerie stillness of the road pressing in on them. The footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. The same cop appeared at the window, his pale face expressionless, his dead eyes locking onto Mark's. His voice was exactly the same, gravelly, hollow, and cold. "I warned you," he whispered, leaning closer. "These roads can be dangerous." And then, without another word, he vanished, just like that, into the darkness, leaving nothing but the echo of his voice and the memory of that haunted road. They never spoke of it again, but from that night on, the shadow of Interstate 95 followed them, creeping into their dreams and whispering through their rearview mirrors. And every time they drove at night, Mark could still hear the faint wail of a siren, haunting him, reminding him that some encounters on the road are never really over.